Good morning. I'm going to continue with my series on the 2016 World Chess Championship between Magnus Carlsen, the champion, and Sergei Karajakin, the challenger. They won one game each in the classical portion, one of the 12 games each. So the match was tied, and then they entered a 4-game rapid playoff. The first two were tied, and the third game was won by Magnus. We're now looking at the fourth rapid game, and since it is only a 4-game playoff, Karajakin, who has the black pieces, has to win this. So has to be adventurous. Very cautious, very good defender, very difficult person to break down, but how's he going to be when he's got to attack with the black pieces? Let's see. So Magnus plays e4. c5. If you're playing with the black pieces for a win, the Sicilian is probably your best choice. If you're playing for a draw with the black pieces, the best response to e4 is probably the Petros defense. Knight comes to f3, pawn comes to d6, very normal open Sicilian. Pawn comes to d4, it's taken, the knight takes, and he develops the other knight, again normal in the open variation, and white plays f3, the so-called prince defense. Pawn comes to e5, so it's similar to a Kalashnikov, but of course white's got the move f3 in first. Knight retreats to b3, yeah, it's a good place for the knight. It's looking at some important central squares, and it's contributing to the defense of the queenside pawns. Yeah, develops the bishop to e7, cautious but good. Pawn comes to c4, tries to take a little bit of space, and Karajakin tries to take some space back. The bishop develops, and the pawn comes forward once more. Knight comes to c1. Might look a bit crazy on c1, but no, it's got the square c3, and from there b4, c4, even f2. Yeah, Karajakin castles, gets his king in safety, and the knight comes out. The queen comes and pins the knight, and the queen comes to d2 to unpin the knight. The knight develops to a6. Why a6 and not c6? He's looking at this square, which you wouldn't be looking at from c6. So he's looking at coming here, and then where from there remains to be seen. So the knight comes indeed to the c5 square, and Carlsen castles, and the bishop is developed. And Karajakin's finished with these developments. He's got a little bit of a poor pawn structure, but he's finished with his development, so he's got something for his poor pawn structure. Carlsen plays rook to b1, and the rook comes to the semi-open file. Plays to b3, and it's taken on passant. Pawn takes back, and he's ready to move in with his knight on the b file, or advance with the b pawn. So the queen comes out of the way so that the advance to the b pawn won't be a fork. So instead of doing that straight away, he puts his knight in a better position, and Karajakin gets his knight out of the way so that now he can't advance the pawn because he would be losing this pawn. The knight comes to b4, looking at d5 and other fine central squares. Bishop comes to c6, and the rook doubles up with the queen. Not threatening to take the pawn here, of course it's defended by the bishop, but yeah, Karajakin grabs some space on the king side. This makes sense. And the bishop falls back. This is to allow the queen to come to the square f2, so that the bishop can think about coming to b6 and putting pressure on the queen. The pawn advances once more, and the queen comes to f6 with a little tempo because it's attacking the pawn on h4. Pawn comes to d7, so it defends the pawn on h4 and prevents the bishop coming to b6. So pawn is challenged, and the rook develops to a better square. Yeah, attacking the pawn, but not really threatening it because it's defended. But it also gives them the opportunity to double pawns on the a file. Bishop comes out to h3, threatening the rook. The knight, if he takes the knight, then it's going to do damage to the pawn structure. But Karajakin thinks that doubling the rooks is more important. He's probably right with that. The knight attacks the rook, and the rook has to retreat to a6. And the knight attacks again. Of course, in this position, one up with Karajakin needing a win. Carlsen, regardless of what the evaluation might say, is going to be perfectly happy with his draw by repetition. If he draws this by repetition, he retains his world championship. So Karajakin chooses a different move. He comes to a5 with his rook. Probably not as good a square as a3. Pawn comes to b6. And the rook supports the second rank along with the queen. The queen comes to c7. Yeah, he's looking for tactical opportunities, really. And the rook doubles up so that he's doubled up on this pawn. So that there might be some ideas at some point in time of sacrificing here and winning this pawn. Obviously, this is defended by the rook as well as the pawn, and this is defended by the bishop as well as the queen. So, but, you know, he's just opening up the tactical possibilities. Bishop comes to f8, so they might be thinking of putting it on the fianchetto square. Pawn is taken, since it was now undefended when the bishop moved, and the knight comes to f4. It's taken, takes back, and he takes the other knight, and now he's playing with pure two knights against two bishops. What makes the bishop pair better than the knight pair? Well, the fact that the bishop pair can cover more ground and more easily have access to all squares. But for that to be a factor in the game, it's got to be the case that the board is open so that the bishops have freedom of movement. This board is very closed, and in a closed board, knights are often better than bishops. So this is a wise strategic decision by Carlsen. Knight comes to b4. He's threatening to take the bishop, and then he's left with just this not so good bishop. You know, when he takes the bishop, the knight comes then to d5, and there's never going to be a piece, a pawn that can chase it away, and he can't attack it with a bishop, so he would have to sacrifice a rook to get rid of that knight. So rook comes to a3 to threaten a pawn, but he takes the bishop anyway. The queen takes, and he plays knight to b5. He realises that he's got a tactical chance if Karajakin takes the pawn. Karajakin takes the pawn anyway. He's got to try and make something happen. So this is the tactical chance that he gets to win the exchange. But in winning the exchange, he loses 2 pawns. So he's now got 5 pawns against Karajakin's got 5 pawns against Carlsen's 4. So it's just 1 pawn up he is, because he gave away the pawn on h4. But now he's got a pawn and a bishop for his rook, and Carlsen's pawn structure isn't that great, and the bishop has some activity, so it might be worth it. You can understand why he done it anyway. Bishop comes to e7, attacking the pawn. It's really difficult to defend this pawn. And Carlsen doesn't even bother trying, he just puts his king on a safer square. And the queen comes to e6 so that the king can't come to h3 and defend the pawn. And the pawn moves out of the way, so it's defended, and the rook takes up a good position where it's attacking this pawn and also threatens to come here. He challenges the rook, and the rook comes and threatens the queen, which is pinned to the king. The rook comes back exactly as before. Carlsen would be very happy with a repetition draw here. As another rook goes back to a7, I would say that the two times that Carlsen has offered a repetition draw, Karajakin has ended up moving his rook to a slightly worse square. So, not being able to accept a draw hasn't helped him here. Perfect centralised position for the rook. The rook comes to the open file on c7. If you can get a queen to support this square, then obviously a rook here might be useful against the queen. Queen comes to to d2 to threaten the f4 pawn, and the queen comes to f6 to defend it and to threaten to come queen here. The queen is threatened, and the queen does come to h4. He proposes a rook trade, and Karajakin can't agree to a rook trade. The pawn's taken, and now he gets a check. Wait a minute, has he messed that up? He's now threatened with mate if he doesn't. It looks very, very difficult for Carlsen here, but he's worked it out, and he has an absolutely lovely fit, because now Karajakin plays queen f2, and he's threatening knight here check, and he can't defend with the rook because it's covered by the bishop, and he can't defend with the queen because the queen has to also keep defending this square. But Carlsen's worked out a really, really lovely finish. Rook goes to c8 check, king comes to h7, and now the cherry on top, queen to h6 check. What a way to finish the match and retain your world championship. If Karajakin takes on h6, then he will be mated by the rook, taking the pawn on f7. This arrangement has been seen, I can't remember the other game, but this arrangement has been seen in another game. Carlsen mentioned that he'd seen this arrangement and seen that he could go for it. So he mentioned the other game, and he, being Carlsen, remembered which other game it had been seen in. But this arrangement, this specific sacrifice, has been seen in another game. I think it was a slightly more complicated version than this version. But a queen sacrifice to a guarantee mate, if the queen is taken, is a very, very fine way to finish the match and retain his World Chess Championship. Don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe to my videos. Thanks. Bye.